off this countdown, we have Donald Harvey, aka the Angel of Death. Donald Harvey is a nurse turned serial killer. So he was working in a hospital as a nurse and was secretly killing off his patients. To him, he was doing them a favor. He thought that his chronically ill patients needed a relief from the pain, so he would smother them with pillows or would poison them or let their oxygen tanks run out. It's believed that he took the lives of over 70 people. However, in 1987, he was only convicted for 37 counts of murder. He was sentenced to life plus 20 years. In March of 2017, Harvey was beat up badly by a fellow inmate. He passed away shortly after. In our 9th spot, we have Albert DeSalvo. Albert DeSalvo, better known as the Boston Strangler, took the lives of 13 women between 1962 and 1964. He would strangle these women with a piece of their clothing before taking advantage of them. In January of 1967, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. A month later, him and 2 other inmates actually managed to escape from prison, and a full-scale manhunt ensued. Thankfully, it wasn't long until he was recaptured. However, in 1973, Albert was stabbed to death by another prisoner. In our 8th spot, we have Ronnie McPeters. Now, Ronnie McPeters has actually been deemed too insane to execute. So Ronnie was first arrested after taking the life of a 27-year-old woman. The woman, Linda Marie Baltazar, was running errands when Ronnie came up to her window while panhandling. She shooed him away and he left, but he ended up coming back and shooting her. He was first placed in jail for his crime and then placed in the rubber room. But that didn't stop him because he was known to set fires in the jail and harass other inmates. So they moved him to San Quentin prison where he was awaiting death row. And that's when he started acting even crazier. Apparently he would attack other prisoners and guards, and was known to smear his feces all over his cell and even himself. This behavior got him off of death row. They literally thought that he was far too troubled to be executed. In our 7th spot, we have Mark Chopper Reed. Mark Reed is an Australian criminal who lived a life of crime. He was known to rip off drug dealers, as well as he would kidnap and torture members of the criminal underworld. It's believed that he was responsible for the death of 19 people and the attempted murder of 11 others. In fact, the movie Chopper is based off of his life, and it's a wild movie. The things he would do were insane. For example, he had a fellow inmate cut both of his ears off so that he could leave H Division and be transferred to a different wing. He also once played Russian roulette with himself. Who does that for fun? In our 6th spot today, we have Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer is one of the most famous serial killers in the world. People all around the world know of him and the sadistic and disturbing crimes that he committed. From 1978 to 1991, Jeffrey murdered and dismembered 17 male individuals. What he did afterwards was even more disturbing. He would keep some of the body parts as souvenirs, even take photographs of the deceased. When police searched his home, they found it littered with human remains. Dahmer was finally arrested on July 22nd of 1991. However, while in prison, there were multiple attempts on his life. On November 28, 1994, an inmate, Christopher Scarver, finally succeeded at taking Dahmer's life. His reasoning behind this? Well, apparently Dahmer was known to taunt others in prison. He would do this by making his prison food look like severed limbs to taunt the other people. He would even drizzle ketchup on top of his blood. Christopher and others found this very unnerving, so he decided to take action against him and beat him to death. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Jason Barnum, aka better known as Eyeball Man. And that's because he literally has a tattoo on his eyeball. Like, he tattooed it completely black. If that doesn't speak volumes about who he is, then I don't know what does. He also has one side of his face tattooed to look like a skull. So not only does this dude look like a scary prisoner, but he is one. This dude has a long list of crimes under his belt, including possession of heroin, first-degree attempted murder, first-degree burglary, and third-degree felony in possession of a weapon. In fact, he was sentenced to 22 years in jail after shooting a police officer. Moving on to number 4, we have NIKKO Jenkins. This guy is one of the scariest inmates in the world. Some say he's the craziest inmate in the world, and you're about to find out why. One time, he killed a man just because he stared at him the wrong way. Not only that, but in court, Jenkins was known to speak in some weird language. He said he used this language to communicate with an Egyptian serpent god, and this god was the one giving him orders to kill people. He also enjoyed talking about the people he killed and smiled the whole time while doing so. In the end, he was convicted for killing 4 individuals. Moving on to number 3, we have Damien Fowkes. In 2002, Damien Fowkes was sentenced to 12 years for a series of armed robberies that he had committed. But while in jail, he committed even more crimes. In 2010, he attempted to kill another prison inmate. He made a DIY shank by melting a razor blade onto plastic cutlery, and he used it to slice a guy's throat. As a result, he was transferred to a higher security prison. But that did not stop him. A year later, he killed an inmate by strangling him to death with strips of his bedding. These attacks gained him the title of being an extremely dangerous prisoner. In our second spot today, we have Alexander PICHUSHKIN. Alexander is a Russian serial killer who wanted to complete the number of squares on a chessboard by killing 64 people. It's said that he has killed around at least 49 individuals and possibly as many as 60. In fact, he was inspired by another serial killer, Andrei Chikatilo, who I have talked about before. In his mind, he wanted to compete with him and kill even more individuals than Andrei did. Now, what I find the weirdest is when Alexander was young, he was said to be such a kind and sociable child. That was until one day when he got struck in the head by a swing. From then on, his whole demeanor completely changed and he got really aggressive. So they think that this accident turned him into a serial killer. And in our number 1 spot today, we have Pedro Rodrigues Filho, aka the Brazilian Maniac. This guy is a Brazilian serial killer who claims to have taken the lives of 100 individuals. He started killing at a young age, one of the first kills being his father. He apparently killed his father with a machete, cut out his heart, and then chewed on it. He also has been known to kill and torture a number of gang members. He did this all before he was 18. He was arrested on May 24th of 1973, during which he was placed in a car with another criminal who he killed for no reason. And while in prison, he went on to kill more people. It's said that he took the lives of 47 inmates in jail alone. Pedro served 42 years in prison before his release in 2018. Yes, he killed that many people and then he got released. Starting off this countdown, we have Elizabeth WETTLAUFER.
I've done this and I'm ready to face it, but I would love to go home for a night.
Elizabeth WETTLAUFER was a Canadian registered nurse for 9 years in southwestern Ontario. In 2016, she quit her nursing job, checked herself into a psychiatric hospital, and confessed to her crimes. Apparently, between 2007 to 2016, she used her powers as a nurse to take the lives of 8 of her patients and injured 6 others. She would do so by giving them lethal doses of insulin. She also admitted to stealing opioids to fuel her personal addiction. After she confessed to the killings, an interview took place with the police, and that's when she confessed her crimes once again, this time in a detailed statement. Apparently, she had voices in her head telling her to kill those patients.
Part of me had started to believe that it was the devil, and part of me thought it might be God was the purpose through my life.
At first, she believed that this was God talking to her, so she felt okay killing for him. Then later on, she thought maybe it was the devil. On top of that, she claimed that it was a gut instinct telling her that these people needed to be killed. And once she did the deed, she would hear laughter in her chest.
Whatever it wasn't a voice in my head, it was a voice in here. And when I would do it afterwards, I would hear like a laughter in my head.
She was sentenced to 8 concurrent life sentences with no chance of parole for 25 years. In our 9th spot, we have Robert Durst. Robert Durst is an American convicted murderer and possible serial killer. It all started in 1982 with the disappearance of his wife, Kathy Durst. Obviously, he was the main suspect. Then in 2000, he murdered one of his friends, Susan Berman, and in 2001, he killed his neighbor. And just this year, he was finally convicted for killing his wife. During his interviews and interrogations, he maintained his innocence, claiming that he never did it. But after one of his final interviews, he made a grave mistake. He went to the bathroom and didn't realize that his mic was still on. While in the bathroom, he was talking to himself and basically confessed to the killings.
There it is. You're caught. Disaster. What the hell did I do? Kill them all. Of course.
The interviewers were completely shocked by what they heard, and Robert was immediately arrested. In our 8th spot, we have Daniel Wozenak. Daniel Wozenak is a former community theater actor who in May of 2010 took the lives of 2 people. During that time, he was struggling financially. He was in debt and unemployed. Then when he heard that his friend Sam Herr had $62,000 from combat pay, he decided to kill Sam in order to steal his money. Then he ended up killing a woman named Julie Kabushi, a 23-year-old college student who was tutoring Sam. His plan was to make it seem like Sam killed Julie and then went on the run. But in the end, he was caught. This video is from the police interrogation of Daniel. Here's him putting the blame on Sam.
Opened the door, it was Sam. I'm like, hey man, what's going on? Everything good? And he's like, not good, we're in trouble. We need to get the out of here. And so he's like, there's a dead body in my apartment. He said he'd been doing some heavy drugs. He's like, I shot somebody. I was not happy about it. It was a fit of rage. And honestly, she had it coming. I said she.
But of course the police weren't buying his story. It was all too convenient.
Where's the gun, Sam? What did you do with the gun?
I'm not Sam, my name's Dan.
I know, but that's what you heard. Wasn't that what you were asking him?
No, I have nothing to do with this because my life was in danger with my wife. I'm sorry.
How was your life in danger?
He threatened it.
The 2 interrogators could see through Daniel's act. In fact, they said it was as if he was putting on a theater show for them. In the end, Daniel did confess, but figured he might try and act insane in order to get off with lesser charges.
Money and insanity.
Money and insanity. Okay.
In our 7th spot, we have patient number 18. Now this has got to be one of the creepiest and mysterious clips on the internet. It's an interview featuring a man named Patient 18. This interview is filmed at a psychiatric hospital and this man is there because he has schizophrenia. This tape is actually what schools use to teach their students about schizophrenia and the mind. But it's mysterious because we don't know much about this dude. Now I just want to say, having schizophrenia or mental health issues does not make this guy an evil person. He's on today's list because apparently at the hospital he admitted to taking someone's life. Plus he has a history of criminal behavior. Upon doing more research, this might be a man named Stephen E. Anyways, take a look at this interview.
And what happened that ended up with your being here in the hospital?
The psychiatrist decided that this was the situation for me.
Did he tell you why?
No, the psychiatrist did not.
Has anybody told you why?
No.
I got chills. I don't know about you. It's quite interesting how he carefully plans out his answers. Plus, no matter what they're talking about, he still shows no emotion.
And in what way are you different?
I am trying to do with my life something which few people try to do. And this influences my thinking and consequently my actions.
He may seem calm on the outside, but what you can't imagine is everything that's going on in his head. You can tell he's trying hard to stay in control.
As soon as I express the belief that I do not belong in this hospital, which is a mental hospital, then those who dislike me want to find a worse place for me.
In our 6th spot, we have Alonso Perez. In 2016, Alonso Perez was charged for a series of crimes, including robbery with use of a deadly weapon, attempted murder with use of a deadly weapon, grand larceny, and battery. He was also arrested in connection with the death of Mohammed Robinson. This is footage of Alonso inside of the interrogation cell waiting to be questioned. But not much of that actually happens as he manages to escape. First, we see him looking around at the cameras and then he decides to forcibly remove his handcuffs. Now he does manage to get them off, but he's not ready to leave yet. He hasn't thought of a plan. So he pretends that his handcuffs are still on and he thinks of an escape plan. When he thinks of his plan, he gets up, climbs up, and escapes by crawling through the ceiling. He then drove away in a rental truck that someone left with the engine running. But don't worry, it was short-lived freedom because within days he was caught again, and in more trouble. In the end though, he did plead guilty to 3 murders. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Andrei Chikatilo. Andrei Chikatilo, otherwise known as the Butcher of Rostov or the Rostov Ripper, was responsible for the deaths of 56 individuals. He would lure people that he met at bus stops or train stations away to remote locations and then he would murder them. Sometimes he would even eat certain parts of his victims. In this interview, what shocks a lot of people is the fact that everyone expects him to act like a monster, but in fact, he acts quite the opposite. He seems innocent, which is either an act or, you know, his true personality. So he keeps up the innocent act saying how he feels sorry, blah blah blah. But the act drops when he is asked one question. Now the interview is in Russian, but I have the translation. So the interviewer asks him if he has ever thought about meeting his victims in heaven or hell. He answers with, and I quote, "No, I have never thought about that, never. I feel like it doesn't bother me. I have never thought about it. I have already passed all rounds of hell in my life. I am already ready to pass away to the other world again." That right there is creepy, not gonna lie. In our 4th spot we have David Berkowitz, but you probably better know him as the son of Sam. He was a serial killer who took the lives of 6 individuals and wounded 7 others in New York City for more than a year. He would typically target good-looking young women with long brown hair. As a result, a number of women were cutting their hair short or dyeing it blonde. He was eventually known as the son of Sam because he would leave letters near his victims' bodies, signing it off with that name. In the end, he was caught and claimed that his neighbor's dog was possessed by a demon and that this demon dog was the one telling him to kill these people. Wild, I know. Well, years later he did this interview. He admits to being into Satanism and how it influenced him.
Yeah. I mean, when you talk about Satan, what are you actually referring to?
Well, you know, many people may not really understand that, but there was a time I was so confused and so troubled that I was seeking meaning and purpose. I was seeking something, I don't know, as my life began to spin out of control. I mean, I got involved in like Satanism and I was reading the Satanic Bible. And
he continues on talking about himself, but a lot of people believe he was just putting on an act the whole time, that he was trying to convince people that he's normal so that he would be released early. This is pretty common among serial killers. They love to manipulate people.
How does it feel to be here for 30 years knowing that this is going to be it?
You know, it's like, you know, the expression, take one day at a time, and it's never easy, you know, being incarcerated. I have no one to blame but myself.
In our 3rd spot we have Michael Beaver. In July of 2015, 16-year-old Michael Beaver and his 18-year-old brother Robert took the lives of their parents and 3 siblings. They first attacked their sister. When she screamed, their mother ran out of the bedroom and they stabbed her over 50 times. Eventually they worked their way around the house, killing their family members. It's a very scary and graphic case. In this interview, Michael completely confesses to everything to an officer.
So he was buying weapons because you guys had talked about murdering.
Yeah, and he started planning it.
Okay. And that you didn't want to do it?
I don't want to do it. I didn't, just because I didn't kill anyone.
Okay.
I stabbed someone.
Who did you stab?
My younger brother, Christopher.
Christopher? How old's Christopher?
9, I think.
What did you stab him with?
My knife.
What's your knife look like?
There's literally no emotion in his voice, and for being so young, he doesn't seem affected by this at all. But here's the thing, this guy was obsessed with other killers, and the police officer noticed this and kept prying.
Because you mentioned a couple names of, are those like serial killers or something?
What, like Columbine?
Yeah.
Columbine and James Egan Holmes. James Egan Holmes is a guy that shot at the theater.
In Colorado?
Yeah, he killed 12 and
wow. How many were killed in Columbine?
Columbine, I don't know, like 15,
okay.
I think.
He knew the killer's first and last names and their kill count. No one just knows that information off the top of their head, so that's creepy. In our second spot, we have the BTK killer. Between the years of 1974 to 1991, American serial killer Dennis Rader took the lives of 10 individuals. In 2005, he was convicted for his crimes and was sentenced to 175 years in solitary confinement without the possibility of parole. This video is Dennis's confession to killing Maureen Hedge.
So I very carefully snuck into the house, kind of like a cat burglar, and after checking the house, she wasn't there. So about that time, the doors rattled, so I went back to one of the bedrooms and hid back there in one of the bedrooms.
He then proceeded to talk about how he stayed in her house for hours until the next morning when he woke up and strangled her.
No, I manually strangled her when she started to scream.
So you used your hands?
Yes, sir.
And you strangled her? Did she die?
Yes.
It's chilling seeing him talk so casually about all of this. And in our number one spot today, we have Issei Sagawa.
たった指先ほどの小さな銃弾を放ったことによってさまざまな人たちを傷つけ、あるいは変えてしまう。
If you haven't heard of this case, then brace yourself because it's a very dark and gruesome one. In 1981, Issei Sagawa killed and ate a woman named Renee Hartfelt. Apparently, he always had a fantasy to eat a beautiful human. When he saw Renee, he knew she was the one. On June 11th, 1981, he invited her over, and then he shot her at the back of the neck and then ate her over the next 2 days. That's not even the worst part. The worst part is that he was never convicted of his crimes. He literally spent 2 days in jail, then was sent back to Japan, and then he became a celebrity there. He was so famous that he made a living through the public's interest in his crime. Imagine that, literally becoming wealthy for killing someone. He's guilty, he's even admitted to it, but he never got penalized. Here are some disturbing moments from an interview with him.
多分もう一晩でも食事をルネとしていたら食べる対象には考えたことはない。自分の書いたシナリオ、ずっと前からそういうシチュエーションを考えて、どっから食べる、どうやってやる、全てこう頭の中にシナリオができてた。
He continues on, going into gruesome details about his murder and about another time that he attacked a different woman. I personally had a hard time sitting still watching this, it's just way too much. Starting off this countdown, we have Eileen Wuornos. Eileen Wuornos is often considered the first female serial killer. She was found guilty of killing 7 men. She would murder them, rob them, and then drive home in their cars. Although she claims every murder was self-defense. In our interview, we can see how lax she is when talking about killing.
Just shot in self-defense, boom, boom, boom. You know, they weren't cut up, they weren't sliced up, no OJ jazz, you know. And he said, I did the most horrendous crime in the whole wide world.
Death and murder literally doesn't faze her at all. In fact, she claims that what she did wasn't even bad. Yeah, she tries to justify her actions by saying she just shot them, as if that's not a big deal.
But you've been convicted of killing 7 men.
Everybody's looking at the number.
Does that not, you killed 7 men, 7 strangers, does that not make you a serial killer?
So I didn't kill them every day, did I?
Again, she's acting like her killing 7 men isn't a big deal. Like, oh, it's just 7 men, people have done worse. It's crazy. Moving on to number 9, we have the Night Stalker. Richard Ramirez, otherwise known as the Night Stalker, was an American serial killer and robber who killed 13 to 16 plus individuals. At his trials, the judge stated that he never showed any remorse for these doings. I think the creepiest part about his interview is when he admits to being evil.
Do you admit to being evil, Richard?
We are all evil in some form or another, are we not? Yes, I am evil. Not 100%, but I am evil.
And we see him try to justify his killings by saying the government does worse things to people than what he has done.
Serial killers do on a small scale what governments do on a large one. They are a product of the times, and these are bloodthirsty times. Even psychopaths have emotions if you dig deep enough, but then again, maybe they don't.
In our 8th spot, we have Edward Edwards. Edward Wayne Edwards, otherwise known as the Hook Man or the Man with the Hook, was an American con artist turned serial killer. In fact, when he committed his long list of crimes, he never wore a mask because he wanted to be famous. In 2010, he did an interview and confessed to all his crimes. Again, it makes me so uncomfortable listening to how killers took someone's life.
Taking his hand, he's going through the bottom of the duffel bag trying to find the cigarettes, and I'm standing right here, and I have the sawed-off shotgun, and I ease it out of the bag while Danny's down there looking, and
He's just too calm talking about all of this. During the interview, he also stated that he wanted the death penalty and thinks that he deserves it.
I want the death penalty.
You don't want us to be in prison for a long time on everything else that's been going on.
Right, I'm not a healthy man.
In our 7th spot, we have PEREZ Bennett. During an interview with Piers Morgan, PEREZ Bennett, who at 13 years of age killed his young sister, admits that he did this as a way to punish his mother.
Specifically in the end.
Yes.
To cause your mother maximum pain. This has achieved your goal, which was to effectively mean your mother lost both her children at once.
In 2007, Bennett convinced their babysitter to leave early and then proceeded to stab his sister 17 times. It's such a tragic case. What makes it worse is how he pretends to say he loved his sister. In the interview, he was asked to describe why he loved his sister, and he couldn't.
Because I loved her. I loved her with every fiber of my being.
They say it's like asking a colorblind person to describe the color red. They can't do it. He can't describe love because he can't feel it.
Exactly like she said, it's because PEREZ is incapable of feeling emotions. No guilt, no love, nothing. Moving on to number 6, we have Angela Simpson.
Right.
You murdered this man.
Yes.
You tortured him.
Of course.
This is an interview with killer Angela Simpson. She was arrested after torturing and killing a man in a wheelchair for snitching. During this interview, she tells exactly what happened, how she did it, and why. The scariest part is how forward she is about this all. She doesn't care that she's going to prison or that she killed someone.
You're not here to pretend to be remorseful.
Of course not. Why would I do that?
Are you remorseful?
Not at all.
She's not remorseful at all, and she's very open about everything.
To my house, walked him down the street. I don't know why the media acts like the motherfucker couldn't walk. He walked very well. Walked him upstairs, kicked his ass.
Like, imagine being okay with taking someone's life. This interview sends shivers down my spine just listening to her and watching the stillness in her body and the calmness in her voice. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Manuel VELA. In 2016, a 28-year-old man, Manuel VELA, was arrested after killing his girlfriend and their unborn baby. In this interview, you can tell that Manuel suffered from schizophrenia. He claims that the father told him to kill his girlfriend and her baby. Keep in mind, he is the father to her baby. And then he says that he is the Antichrist.
And that's where I cut her open, when he told me to.
Who told you to?
The father. It's just the same one who was to communicate with Jesus Christ is when he was there.
Although it seems like he is intoxicated during this interview, he is not. He's just experiencing hallucinations and delusions. In this interview, he also claims he would receive commands from outer space and extraterrestrials. A lot of people found this interview disturbing just because you can see how far gone Manuel is. He's no longer in control of himself. In our 4th spot, we have Arthur Shawcross. Arthur John Shawcross was an American serial killer in Rochester, New York that took the lives of 13 individuals. His first 2 murders were committed in 1972. He was caught for both and then sentenced to 25 years. But after serving 15 years, he was released on parole. That's when he continued on with the killings and took the lives of 11 different people. His interview is creepy for a number of reasons.
Do you remember killing her?
Yeah, possibly.
He gives me the chills. He's just twitching and his voice is just so unnerving. But it gets worse once he starts talking about his crimes.
How did you kill her?
Probably strangulation.
How do you know when they're dead?
How? I don't know, just do.
You can see that he won't admit it directly. He says maybe he killed her and maybe she died by strangulation, it gets worse.
Reach over my shoulder like this, right behind my neck, and I pull out a brand new machete. When she backed out and I come up behind her.
He's just a ruthless killer. In our third spot, we have Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was an infamous serial killer who was responsible for murdering 30 women. Although it's thought that this number may be even higher. He would often kill these women in brutal ways. In his interviews, he shows no remorse for his actions, and the calm tone of his voice is very disturbing.
I can see how certain feelings and ideas developed in me to the point where I began to act out on them. Certain very violent and very destructive feelings.
Throughout this whole interview, Bundy tries to gain sympathy from the interviewer and the audience. You can see how he's trying to manipulate your emotions, which is terrifying. A lot of people commented saying that Bundy is trying to act human in these interviews. He knows exactly what to say and how to say it to manipulate you.
It was like something had, say, snapped, that I knew that that I couldn't control it anymore, that these barriers that I had learned as a child, that had been instilled in me, were not enough to hold me back with respect to seeking out and harming somebody.
It's a huge reason why he was so famous and had a huge media following. Moving on at number 2, we have Beth Thomas. Beth Thomas was a young girl featured in a documentary titled The Child of Rage. At such a young age, Beth displayed psychopathic tendencies, including harming her brother on a number of occasions and trying to kill her parents. Her parents were terrified of her and her brother Jonathan's safety, as they should be. Take a look at her interview.
Why is your brother afraid of you?
Because I hurt him so much.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what, at nighttime, what do your parents do to your door?
Lock it shut.
Why do they lock it shut?
Because they don't want me to hurt John.
So on a number of occasions, Beth would go into her brother's room at night to try and kill him. On top of that, she used to steal knives from the kitchen to try and harm her family with.
Big sharp ones.
And what do you want to do with those knives?
Kill John and Mommy with them, and Daddy.
That's not all. Here is her recounting the time she hurt Jonathan.
And what happened to your brother? Tell me about it.
His head hurt real bad, but his chin, he had to have stitches in it.
Now apparently doctors deemed that she acted this way as part of her traumatic past. Now it's said that after years of therapy, she is now a healthy adult. And in our number 1 spot, we have Jeffrey Dahmer.
I desensitized myself to it. I don't know, I went to great lengths.
Between 1878 to 1991, American serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer murdered and dismembered 17 men and boys. He would pack the victims' body parts into plastic bags and bury them behind his parents' home. He would also take disturbing photographs of his deceased victims and keep certain body parts as souvenirs. He also had tendencies to eat the victims. This gave him the name the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster. Upon searching his home, police found albums full of pictures of body parts, and his place was filled with human remains. Before his death, Jeffrey had an interview with Inside Edition and other news channels. In these interviews, he shares gory details about the men he killed and why he did it.
One time I brought this young man back to the hotel room, the Ambassador Hotel. Was just planning on drugging him and spending the night with him. Had no intention of hurting him.
What's creepy is how calm he is talking about all this. Like he's murdered so many people and shows no remorse, just like all the other serial killers on this list.
I was handcuffed, and it was just the realization that there was no point in trying to hide my actions anymore. Hearing
him say that he kept the dead with him as long as possible makes me sick. When police raided his house, they found heads were in the fridge and freezer, 2 skulls were on display in the house, and they found a 57-gallon drum filled with decomposing bodies in his room.
Number 10, Albert Fish. Albert is one of the oldest people on this list, but that does not mean his crimes were any less horrific than anyone else's. Yeah, he was nicknamed the Brooklyn Vampire, or the Moon Maniac, or the Boogeyman. By its name alone, you could probably guess what he did to bodies. Yeah, it's horrible. I can't even talk about it on YouTube. Albert was a terrible human being who did terrible things. Now, in the early 1900s, Albert was arrested, tried, and convicted for killing and consuming 3 people, but the horror was not over yet. Yeah. No, Albert began to claim that although people knew about 3, that number, the real number, was actually close to 100 victims. And he even claimed that he had some in every single state, which is impossible to find now, honestly, and it's horribly disgusting to think about. To make matters even worse, as if it wasn't already terrible enough, he also sent a letter to the mother of one of his victims, and he detailed everything about how he lured the victim in and the rest of these horrible things that occurred afterwards. Number 9, the alphabet. Yet to be identified. Guess I'm not sleeping tonight. Yeah, we're talking cold cases in this list. We're talking unsolved crimes right now, and we're talking about one of the worst. The alphabet killings are a series of unsolved crimes named because of how each victim had first initials that matched their last. So like their first and last name started with the same letter, that type of thing. Details on how the lives were taken and where the remains were placed afterwards, it just connected, right? They were all taken in a similar area around the same time. There are theories and suspects as to who could have committed these horrific crimes, but as of right now, no one knows for sure. These crimes were committed between 1971 and 1973 in Rochester, New York, and because of the timing, it's possible that whoever committed these crimes could still be alive, and perhaps they're not. Who knows? Number 8, Pedro Lopez. Pedro Lopez had a very difficult life growing up. He committed a plethora of horrifying crimes throughout South America during the 1970s. By the time the 80s rolled around, as he made a mistake during one of his awful crimes, this led to his arrest. Now, once in police custody, he spilled everything on basically his entire life and confessed to an insane amount of crimes. Like, we're talking 240 killings on top of the 110 that they already suspected him of. Police were a little skeptical of just how many crimes he said he committed, but Pedro was able to lead them to a mass grave where they recovered a total of 53 people's remains. So, you know, they're probably gonna believe the rest of it. Pedro, of course, went to jail, but get this, he was somehow released in 1994, which is absolutely insane. He was sent to some sort of mental institution for 3 years after, but he was also released from there on good behavior. So aside from the crimes he committed and the fact that they let him go, are you ready for the worst part? In 2002, he was suspected of being the perpetrator of a new crime, but no one has been able to find him since 1998. Number 7, the Long Island Killer. What would a list of horrifying people be without some of the most dreaded unidentified serial killers, right? The most unidentified ones are always the most creepy. The Long Island Killer, of course, operated in the Long Island region and is said to have begun being active right back in the 1996 area, and it's entirely possible that they may currently still be active. Again, it's so recent where it's like, possibly. Recent enough? Maybe. At the moment, there's a range of 10 to 17 crimes that authorities believe could be linked to this yet to be identified person. Unfortunately, there's not much that's known about this person or who they might be or anything like that, although it's currently thought that they're likely a white male in his mid-20s to 40s with extensive knowledge of law enforcement operations and techniques, and they believe this because it would make sense as to why he's been so successful in avoiding capture so far. Number 6, the Doodler. The nickname that this unidentified killer received is due to his practice of sketching his victims before taking their lives. This unidentified killer committed their crimes in the San Francisco area from January 1974 to September 1975, and they specifically targeted the LGBTQ community. It's believed that 14 deaths can be attributed to this killer, while 3 others were injured in the process. Unfortunately, because of stigma and the sensitivities surrounding gay men at the time, the 3 who did survive this monster were very reluctant when speaking with authorities for fear of being, outed as a result of it. This has led, of course, to there being little information for them to work with in terms of identifying the man responsible. For a while, there was a primary suspect, but that person has never been officially charged because sadly, none of the survivors felt comfortable enough to testify in court. There's a very real chance that authorities know who the killer is, but just don't have the evidence yet to prove it in a court of law. The most terrifying thought of all. Number 5, Tex Watson. Tex Watson was one of the central members of the Manson family, which was led, of course, by Charles Manson, and was a willing participant for all of those crimes, specifically the crimes that took place August 9th and 10th, 1969. In October 1969, Tex knew his arrest was coming, so he fled to his home state of Texas, but was later arrested and then, sent back to California, of course. Now, once he was in California, he refused to talk or eat and ended up losing 55 pounds, which got him sent to get tested to see if he was fit to stand trial, which at that time he was. In 1971, he was convicted on 7 counts of first-degree murder and 1 one count of conspiracy to commit. He originally received a death sentence, but ended up being commuted to life in prison sentence. While in prison, apparently this guy's been living the life, it seems, because not only has he been able to release a book while inside, but he also got married, and through visits, he fathered 4 children with her. Number 4, Richard Ramirez. Richard, who is also known as the Night Stalker, was a serial killer who terrorized the streets of LA back in the 80s. He was known for invading homes, which left him initially being dubbed as the walk-in killer, but he had another signature that was, of course, concerning to many people. This was during the height of the satanic panic, so yeah, buckle up. Richard was known for leaving behind different satanic messages at the scene of all of his crimes. Because of his satanic signature, after he left his first pentagram at the scene of a crime, authorities became worried that he was a Charles Manson copycat. But instead, he was just his own, one-of-a-kind monster. It is said that he would leave more pentagrams behind while also telling his victims to swear to Satan instead of swearing to God. During his court appearances, he would hold up a pentagram, and after pleading not guilty, he said, "Hail Satan." Number 3, Charles Cullen. He used to be a nurse, and he took the lives of his patients throughout his career, and he may be one of the worst serial killers ever recorded. He confessed to taking the lives of 40 people, but through following interviews, it became apparent that the number was way higher than 40. Yeah, he just couldn't remember the names of them all. Yeah, just that many he couldn't remember. But he of course could remember the details of his crimes against them. His crimes started in 1988 and spanned over a decade into 2003. In October 2003, when a patient passed away from low blood sugar, the authorities were called. This person was Charles' final victim, and authorities began looking into him and investigating his past employment history. On December 12, 2003, authorities were arresting him and charging him with only 1 count of his crimes, but he ended up admitting to 40. He ended up pleading guilty to his crimes and arranged a plea deal where authorities would not seek the death penalty if he cooperated. During one of his court proceedings, he continually asked the judge to step down, and apparently he repeatedly chanted, "Your Honor, you need to step down." He repeatedly chanted that over and over, 25 minutes straight. Even after he was restrained and gagged for his outbursts, he kept going. It's thought that his victims might be up in the 400 range, which is truly just unbelievable and so tragic. But Charles was sentenced to 8 consecutive life sentences and will be eligible for parole in 2403. Nice. Number 2, Adnan Kolak. This Turkish serial killer is responsible for taking the lives of 11 women who were all between the ages of 68 and 95. He was also responsible for 6 other crimes that were, of course, also elderly women, sadly, so there's a horrible theme going on here in his life. It's absolutely disgusting. Now down the road, he eventually gets caught for said horrible crimes, and he was sentenced to 6 death sentences as well as 40 years in prison. Now, this was back in 1995 when he was first sentenced, but cut to 2004, the death penalty in Turkey was abolished, which meant that in May 2005, Adnan Kolak was released from jail. And finally, number 1, Charlene Gallego. A match made in hell, it seems. Here we go. Back in the late 70s, Charlene Gallego, alongside her twisted husband, Gerald, they were the worst in Sacramento, California. They kidnapped and then later killed 10 victims. But when they kidnapped them, they kept them and then they abused them for a while horribly before ultimately ending their lives. It really was the most twisted situation possible. Just disgusting people. Now, cut to 1984, Charlene pleads guilty to murder and receives 16 years. Her husband was waiting for execution, but he died of cancer before meeting that fate, so nice. But Charlene, she got out and moved to Fair Oaks, California, where she has since changed her name. So we have no idea where she is or who she is, so you can sleep on that.